Hello, everyone, and it's delightful to see you all here today. While we share space on the virtual plane and have the privilege of speaking to a global community, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking from the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, the original peoples of Yelamu, now commonly referred to as San Francisco. My name is Vanessa Chang, and I am a writer, curator, and researcher working at the intersection of art and technology. I also work with Leonardo, the International Society for the Arts, Sciences, and Technology, and I'm on the board of Immersive Arts Alliance, which brings you today's panel. Immersive Arts Alliance is a newly formed nonprofit dedicated to encouraging, developing, and presenting multidisciplinary performances in the Bay Area and beyond. We support collaboration between international and local artists working with new media technologies, creating experiences that break down the barrier between art and audience. We also engage the public in vital forums and discussions about the impact of art and technology on creativity and culture at large. In today's discussion, Art and Activism, we'll talk about the increasingly porous barrier between being a citizen and being an artist. Together, we'll explore the distinction, if one exists, between creating imaginative art and imagining and creating a better world. And a timely coincidence, today is also International Human Rights Day. So I'm pleased to be sharing that with you all today. So without further ado, let's get started. So everyone who's tuning in will have time for a Q&A at the end, but if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A box. And if it makes sense, we'll address them along the way. First, I'd like to introduce Taro Hattori. Taro Hattori is an interdisciplinary installation artist originally from Tokyo, Japan, and currently lives in Richmond, California. Hattori has been showing his installation work and socially engaged projects nationally and internationally. He has been awarded residencies from numerous places, including Headland Center for the Arts, Art Omi, McCall Center for Visual Art, Kuando Museum of Fine Art, and he has also received grants or awards from Art Matter, the Zellerbach Foundation, California Humanities, California Arts Council, West Collection, and the Center for Cultural Innovation. His work is represented by Swarm Gallery Oakland and West Collection in Philadelphia, Black Square Gallery in Miami, and Peter Miller Gallery in Chicago. Hattori currently teaches at California College of the Arts. Taro, thank you for being here. Will you tell us a little bit about your practice and how you understand your practice in the context of art and activism?
Okay, thank you very much for introducing me and also inviting us to this great conversation. And it's challenging time to for in general, so for everybody. So, but it's really nice to have this kind of opportunity to talk about our work and how it's related to the society, and then through the lens of activism. And let me share my screen so that you can, get the idea of what I do. And let me share. Okay, so this is the work called XInclusivity. XInclusivity is a series I have been doing for I don't know, maybe almost close to 10 years. And this is about the kind of like double standard our society always has. And because this word X-inclusivity, this is a combination. Of course, I made up this word, exclusivity and inclusivity. And our society, and probably any entity, any group of people, always has this double standard, or the kind of like a dual dynamics of try to include people, but also try to exclude them at the same time. So it's more like a double speak condition we are living in. Many people, especially some specific people. In this case, I'm showing this picture of the version 4, in which I worked with the refugee community in Oakland. And in this project, I worked with several different organizations who worked with, who had been working with refugees community, especially in Oakland. And I got to know people, organizers, and also refugee people, and started collecting stories. And in this specific installation, I created the structure with bricks, and I asked them to be inside of it and basically talk about their story. And I had asked them beforehand to choose a song to sing. And so after they talked about their story, to their journey to come to the United States, and then where they were, and yes, and then they sang a song, then destroy the tower that was surrounding them, and then get out of the tower. So that performance was documented on site, and then projected. When the viewers come into the gallery, they could see the performance that is projected on the floor. So, but it has so many other components as well. There are interviews, and also the other participatory components also. So installation is not only one thing people could see, but yeah, other things they could do. And also I wanted to show briefly this picture. Actually, Rodney is here. So this is the project I did with Montalvo Arts Center called Rolling Counterpoint. This is a conversation-based project, which we had conversation over difficult social issues and inside of Tea House. And we traveled, actually, I made the version, which is on the trailer, and traveled through several different places in the Bay Area, and then, yeah, had a conversation. So let me stop sharing my this window. Okay, let me stop. So relationship of the activism is really, in my way, a little bit indirect. So we can talk more about it, but this is what I do. And yeah, so lots of active elements, which we have more participatory, and also the yeah, more about conversation, lots of music there. So yeah, this is, I hope you get the general idea about what I have been doing. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Taro. Really interesting. I have several questions for you about your work. With that, let's get into Nancy's work a little bit. So Nancy Baker Cahill is an artist working at the intersection of fine art, new media, and activism. She is the founder and artistic director of Fourth Wall, a free augmented reality public art platform exploring resistance and inclusive creative expression. In 2019, she received an Impact Maker to Watch award at LA City Hall and was recognized by the LA Times as one of the Arts Faces of the Year, and just recently included in Art News's list of 2021 deciders. Baker Cahill is a featured TEDx speaker and is currently one of the 10 artist scholars in the Berggruen Institute's inaugural 2020 Transformations of the Humans Fellowship. So Nancy, tell us a little bit about your practice and how you understand where it intersects with art and activism.
Okay, I will share my screen. There we go. Okay, I hope everyone can see this. So as Vanessa mentioned, I have an AR public art app, and as I've been a studio artist for many years, and drawing is really my first language. So I not only draw in quote unquote analog on paper, but also in virtual reality, and now of course augmented reality. And a lot of my projects are collaborative, and I also do some large scale AR public art commissions myself. And what you're looking at right here is my most recent project, which launched July 4th. It's called Liberty Bell, and it appears in 6 different historically significant locations across the US. It was commissioned by the Art Production Fund actually about 18 months ago or longer. And I'd been thinking a lot about Civil War. I'd been thinking a lot about liberty and founding ideals of this country. And I really wanted to, so I had no idea we had a pandemic coming. I didn't know that we'd have the kind of civil unrest. I also had no idea that things were going to get so out of hand in terms of, you know, conspiracy theories, and I could get into all of it. But I wanted to really examine what the concept of liberty meant. I wanted to ask the question, really, what does liberty mean in a moment of, you know, radical economic and racial inequality, structural racism, disinformation, police brutality, voter suppression, environmental racism and climate change, detention centers, unchecked nationalism, biased algorithms, armed militias. Of course, the armed militias came more recently, and so a lot of my projects involve sound. I'm really interested in an immersive experience that has some impact on the viewer when they go. So this piece appeared, and it has a really rich soundscape that goes with it. And I just didn't have time to, I didn't want to use the time to play it for you. If you're interested, you can of course go to my website. But there's one in Boston, in Philadelphia, site of the original Liberty Bell, Selma, next to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, of course, hugely significant for voting rights and civil rights, Washington, DC, Charleston, South Carolina, site of the original start of the Civil War, and the Rockaways. So I also do, a lot of my work is collaborative. So that was my own project, but I was very fortunate this year to collaborate with an artist in Louisville named Breonna Taylor. And this was also commissioned, it wasn't commissioned, but it was organized by 21C, a wonderful curator named Alice Gray Stites. And Breonna got together with Hannah Drake, who's an incredible spoken word poet, and made this AR monument to Breonna Taylor. She got permission from Breonna Taylor's family, and we installed it in front of Metro Hall, where there have been a number of protests on Breonna Taylor's behalf, and it's called She Ascends, and it also has sound. I'm just going to play it for 1 second. Also on the Fourth Wall app website, you can see it there, but it felt very impactful to use AR in this way to really, as a monument, as a celebration of a life, and to remember her legacy. I also was very lucky to host In Plain Sight, which was a massive, massive collaborative undertaking led by 2 artists here in LA, Castles and Rafa Esparza, and they organized skywriting over ICE detention centers and immigrant detention centers and prisons all over the United States, all coordinated actually for the same weekend of July 4th. But we really wanted the project to live on in perpetuity, so we translated their messages into AR. And that's where they are. We have, I think, 15 different locations. They had 80 different, I think they had 80 different locations, but we have AR in 15 different locations. And I'm really honored to have hosted this, even though I didn't participate in the making of the art myself. The thing that really, the game changer for me was when my friend Tanya Aganiga, who does a lot of activist work at the border, she's an artist here in LA and one of my best friends. She took my app, my Fourth Wall app, which was basically created to challenge public art and how it could be used, and take it outside of these institutions of permission. And I basically offered my VR drawings that have been translated into AR, and then users can put them in anywhere they want in the world and create their own context and content. And she put the piece in Mexico, excuse me, in the United States, pulled it through the border wall into Tijuana, to really underscore that art can and should always be borderless. And that was a real light bulb moment for me. And that launched my coordinates platform, which is a geolocated platform. All my work that I do that's collaborative and individual now is geolocated at very specific sites for very specific reasons. I won't play these right now, but I have also put some AR images over some significant rallies of note. And actually one of my very first AR pieces was when Justice Kavanaugh was confirmed that week. And I've been thinking a lot about silenced voices and victims of sexual assault, and the fact that the ERA has never been ratified. We remain unequally protected under the law. And I had done a drawing series based on a book about the way that trauma lives in the body and about this one feminist philosopher's sexual assault. And I thought, you know, that's the image I want to put in front of the Supreme Court. So I was very fortunate to have a collaborator in DC who went on site, helped me geolocate it, helped me, you know, get the size and the location right. And there it was for the protest when Dr. Ford was giving her testimony. And most recently, this is since morphed into something else, but back in October, I guess November, I started thinking a lot about I think a lot about this anyway, but responsibility, and just decided to really count the numbers, which of course skyrocketed since then. We're up to 15 million. We're approaching 300,000 deaths. I have a new message that's involved, which I chose not to share with you for very specific reasons. But anyway, that's sort of a recent intervention. So I have a lot to say and a lot more to show, but this is just to give you a little taste of this part of my practice. So I cede the floor, and I will stop.
Thank you, Nancy. Love it. AR just gives you so much space to work with, and I'm excited to get more into that. All right, and to round us out here, I'd like to introduce Rodney Ewing. Rodney is a visual artist based in San Francisco. Ewing's drawings, installations, and mixed media works focus on his need to intersect body and place, memory and fact, to re-examine human histories, cultural conditions, and events. With his work, he's pursuing a narrative that requires us to be present and intimate. His work has been exhibited at the Museum of African Diaspora, SF MoMA, UFRET Museum of Art, the Drawing Center, Root Division, Jack Fisher Gallery, San Francisco Art Commission Gallery, Nancy Toomey Fine Art, Alter Space Gallery, and Ictus Projects. He's been an artist in residence at Recology and the DeYoung Museum of Fine Arts, as well as Jurassic, Headland Center for the Arts in Sausalito, and Bemis Center for the Arts in Nebraska. He received his BFA in printmaking from Louisiana State University and his MFA in printmaking from West Virginia University. Rodney, would you like to tell us a little bit about your practice?
Sure. I think my practice is, lately it's been largely responsive. When I think about a lot of these topical issues that I deal with in my work, and I'm doing a lot of research, some things come immediately, some things have to sort of marinate and grow a little bit. So let me share my screen and show you. There you go, here. So when I was thinking about this, let me get into presentation mode, there we go. So I was thinking about the images for this conversation. I immediately thought about some work I did for the San Francisco Art Commission for their Art on Market Street program. And for those of you not familiar with the program, every year they put out, San Francisco Art Commission, they put out an open call for their bus kiosk that run from Market Street from Embarcadero to 8th Street. And every year there's a different theme. So in late 2017, they put out a call for, and the theme was San Francisco is a sanctuary city. And what does that mean for San Francisco to be a sanctuary city? And I was sort of working back and forth with sort of these institutional forms of identification and what they're lacking. And I had done a project maybe 8 years before that, where I'd taken a bunch of 10 cards and sort of redesigned them and gave people space, not only for their fingerprints, but also for them to be able to tell their story. Because I felt, again, these institutional forms of identification, they leave a lot to be desired. They leave a lot of stories out. So so when this call came up again, and I started thinking about how polarizing the issue of immigration had become during this current administration, and how he had made it so evil and monolithic. And the people who are actually going through this situation, all of their voices were being lost. And so I wanted to find a way so people who are, going through this immigration experience or had gone through this immigration experience from however they immigrated to the United States or found sanctuary in the United States, had had a voice. So I went about talking to people and gathering participants for their images, for their fingerprints, and also for their stories. And so it was like one of the first times I had done anything like this that was this collaborative, where I was actually sitting in front of a person, and having them tell me their story. And when I had them tell them their stories, I didn't really have any place to start other than maybe a just general introduction, like where are you from, and then it was very organic, where they were just sort of told their immigration story or how they felt about it. I didn't try to direct them in any one way or other. There was a few questions I would ask as if something that was unclear to me, but other than that, I just let the interview run the course, and then I had the difficult task of going back through and editing, with these what I felt were like the essential parts of that interview, and again, like these interviews, they were like 3 to 4 pages long, and I would just sit there and type. So, so this is one of the first ones. This gentleman immigrated from Honduras when he was first time when he was 14, the last time when he was 15. And the first thing that really struck me is that when I was 14 or 15 years old, I wouldn't have had it together to be able to do that by myself. And there were some very profound things he said. And one of the things he said was how he eventually ended up in a refugee center trying to come to the United States. It took him 53 days to get out of that place and arrive in San Francisco. In that place, I forgot that men don't cry. In that place, I cried almost every day in private. And so, again, this is his story. This is a crop version of his face. And he actually allowed me to use an abstracted version of his fingerprints. And so there were 6 of these pieces in total. I'm only going to show 3. And yeah, so I wanted a variety of immigration experiences, and everybody had their own voice and own way of saying it. And also, the colors that are in the background represent their home country. So this person is from Taiwan, and her view was, very much from sort of not attacking, but looking at the Constitution very hard, and how it was sort of being subverted at the time. And last one from this series, and this woman was telling me about her journey from her family's journey from Ukraine to the United States, and she was talking to me a lot about cultural differences, but she found a way to sort of talk about the idea of immigration and as being part of almost being communal. More recently, I've been dealing a lot with issues around Black Lives Matter and sort of Black mortality here in the United States. About 5 years ago, I found myself in a situation where I was, was heartbroken and frustrated by the fact that I still to this day don't know what to tell the next generation of African-American children, like how to be safe. When I was coming up as a child, there was always an elder or a parent who would tell you, like, this is how you behave in certain situations. But with the recent escalating violence against Black autonomy lately for mundane pursuits, I kind of felt like that line keeps getting shorter and shorter, and there's not a real clear demarcation about what can keep you safe these days. So I started thinking about what are some of the earliest objects that we use for to learn language and color and shapes as tools as children. And I arrived on the use of children's blocks or playing blocks, and using them as vehicles to really just show the difference, lessons that Black children have to learn versus their white counterparts. And so this is a piece I did at Heaven's Project Space in 2019. Each children's block is 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. And in the front of each block has silkscreen a face of an African-American individual who lost their life at the hands of either police violence or civilian violence. And here is a detail. And on the other three sides are what I mentioned earlier about information that Black children would get to keep safe. And this is some of the more traditional things that would come up. So I did research. I remember things that I was told coming up, and also talked to friends about things they remember being told. So like, watch what you wear, keep your hands visible all the time. So, so this is part of this is called our ABCs, and this is part of a larger project called The Devil Finds Work, where I'm exploring the lack of autonomy, or how the Black body has always had to find ways to navigate sort of this landscape of America. I'll stop sharing. There we go.
Thank you, Rodney. Really powerful work. So something that really strikes me as I hear all of you speak is that there's this incredible tension between the visible and the invisible, the heard and the unheard. Each one of you talked about voices that are silenced and trying to kind of manifest them through kind of collaborative work and interviews, or I mean, Nancy, AR is really interesting for manifesting the visible and the invisible. So this is a general question for all of you within the context of this art and activism frame. How do you see your art practice, or I mean, if you want to get really lofty, the role of art in doing that kind of work of visibility, of making heard?
Okay, that's a very good question, but I think for the purpose of making invisible visible, or making the voice unheard heard, probably I don't think necessarily art is the best method, but we are, okay, at least I feel I'm an artist. So when I respond to any situation, or the kind of meeting with people who are extremely underrepresented in this social dynamics, then there's no other choice than doing, something I can, I think the situation should be integrated in my practice, and then find anything that I can do, and then anything I can do basically comes out of my art. So that's why my art definitely has the aspect of making invisible visible. But I think what I'm doing is not necessarily maximizing this purpose of making things visible, or making things hard, making people's voice hard, even though I definitely, my work has those aspects. Yeah. I don't know how other people think. But.
I think one of the advantages that art has when it sort of goes into the realm of activism, and especially when you go into some more rarefied spaces like, museums or galleries, and people aren't expecting to see that work, is that they're more likely to sit with it. It seems just like like a writer is trying to expand or constantly expand the use of language and finding new ways to use language. I think art has always had that ability to sort of like visually pair things that we wouldn't necessarily think go together. And art and activism was one of those things. But there's always been a history of artists sort of using, that platform, whether it's visual art, and now, in the 21st century, there's so many different ways to do it because of technology has increased. And but there's always I think it's always been that thread. And just like anything else, it depends on the artist and how and what they want to communicate and how they want to communicate it.
Yeah, and I would just add, I guess the way that I think about it is that, you know, more than ever, I think we're seeing how structural power, different sort of systemic power, the influence of surveillance capitalism, this yawning gap of haves and have-nots, and just all of it exacerbated by the pandemic, of course, but certainly pre-existing. I think that there's an opportunity for artists to call out the things that are perhaps forgotten. I mean, I did a massive collaborative AR exhibition in New Orleans called Battlegrounds, where my collaborator Jesse Damiani and I basically asked 24 different artists in New Orleans, what is a contested site to you? And just kind of were astonished at the results. And what was a recurring theme in a lot of the work was, you know, something important happened here and people don't know it, or they don't remember it, or they have no idea. You know, in Lower Ninth Ward, it's being radically gentrified. And a couple of amazing artists, Chandra McCormick and Keith Calhoun, you know, they really wanted to talk about these churches that were vilified at the time as, you know, voodoo and black magic, of course, by white churches, that were the nerve centers of these neighborhoods, and they were all destroyed during Katrina. And of course they had all female leadership. So even more reason to vilify them. And, you know, it was important to them to mark those spaces. And because of geolocation, which is a huge advantage, I will say, you know, I really feel like there's something visceral that happens when you're standing in a space and you're considering an artwork and the history of that space. And to me, you know, and I really feel this powerfully as an artist, that if you're moved emotionally, or even if you're given cause to think for a minute, it doesn't mean it's going to propel you into action and you're going to, you know, start rattling a saber or whatever. But if it gives you a flash of empathy or a little bit of curiosity or a little bit of insight into someone else's story, someone else's history, that's worth doing. And that is why, to me, I kind of feel like it's all blurred, because it comes out of this need to grapple with what these systems of power do and how can we, you know, how can we help amplify voices that are unheard and stories that are unheard.
Yeah, that's great. No, Taro, did you want to respond to that? You looked like
yeah. I think that's yeah, both of you said, like, especially like, you know, when the viewers really kind of emotionally moved when they see something, or when the artists connect kind of unrelated things together to reveal something, then you know, the viewers will somehow surprised by looking at, even though they have seen that or they have heard those things some other places, but through the lens of like an artist's vision, then somehow it starts having this really strong impact on the viewer's thinking. I think that's definitely the role of artists. And I've been using singing and music, and then when I ask my participants who are refugees to sing a song which are related to where they come from, or also the you know, the reason why they needed to get out of the country, etc., etc. So that singing songs basically stays in the viewer's mind, and then that is the impact, that is the weight of the human who had been suffering. And then, so that will lead, hopefully, the change in our society somehow. So I'm not doing the change in the society directly, but I'm trying to leave something in the viewer's mind, definitely.
It seems like in all your work, there's this really amazing tension between the really intimate and the really private encounter and public, and the impact on the public. You know, I mean, Rodney, when I see your work and I see these fingerprints, for example, or Taro, I mean, this image of people like alone in these built walls, and Nancy, when someone is working with AR, they're on a private device, right, that they're trying to encounter with that. So how do you see that intersection of the private and the public as doing the kind of work that you want it to do?
Yeah, I think in my case, especially with the work for the Art Commission, anytime you can tell somebody's story, or let me rephrase that. I wasn't telling their story. I was just a vehicle so they could tell their story. That's the way I sort of looked at it. And it's funny. I was when those pieces went up, I was walking down Market Street one day, and somebody had actually taken a marker and wrote about how they felt about the piece and how they empathized and they really identified with what was going on. And so anytime you can, again, like we've all been saying, anytime you can stop and make something accessible, and even if it is like an intimate detail of somebody's life, and they're willing to put that out there, so other people who are perhaps going through that can identify, and even people who were, who thought it was, again, this monolithic kind of like all immigration is the same, taking jobs, whatever this the dogma was, and they get to see something like that, or they get to understand, as Nancy was talking about, sacred spaces, or Tara, you talking about people, allowed to, it seems like with that piece, people were allowed to grieve about their movement. You're setting up a dynamic where it sort of transcends the idea of art. It definitely transcends the artists who actually made it, because you're providing, again, this space for accessibility, understanding, and and hope, and again, Nancy's just saying empathy.
Yeah, I would just build on what you said, Rodney, so eloquently. It's hard to even say more, but accessibility would be key to that public-private conversation. And yeah, I mean, to me, it's like the connective tissue. I think that like when we are so isolated, especially now, but let's just say in general, through any number of factors, when an artist or even a citizen, someone is telling a story from their heart, they're singing a song from their country, or they're telling you their story of being discriminated against as an immigrant, how can everyone is as entitled to their own opinion, of course, but like that vulnerability is powerful. And to the degree that we can just for a minute see it from their eyes. And I also love that Rodney said that thing about being a vehicle. I mean, I think that, I'm lucky to have this platform. I see it as a vehicle. I see it as that versus, coming in and telling everybody what I think. It doesn't matter what I think. I do think it's a matter of listening and what that listening reveals, but you can't do it unless you bridge that public-private gap. And one of the reasons I personally love public art so much is because I've worked with a lot of communities who don't have access to fancy schools, even museums. They feel intimidated because a lot of the language on the walls, which is, opaque even to people who have been lucky enough to have an education sometimes. And I feel like, to the extent that we can, again, welcome people into a creative conversation, it's just going to lead to better places. I really believe that. I know it sounds corny, and I'm really deeply pessimistic about most things, but I do believe that the more creative people are and the more engaged and the more empowered people feel to speak, the better everybody is collectively. So yeah, that's my response.
I think this, yeah, definitely the issue of accessibility, making the human really being accessible in the public space, and kind of like encouraging people to listen to each other. So I think my work definitely always try to make that thing happen. Like, so whatever the social condition or the problems that we are having behind us, I really want people to feel each individual as a person who has history and who has emotion. And so through the video, even like a technology is another part, of the work, right? So to bring this humanness by using, in my case, by using video and the voice and also the materials around, I really want to embody this human quality in front of people. So whatever they're talking about, whatever the situation, whatever the difficulty we are living in, I really want to kind of have this human experience in front of the viewers. And if we understand each of us is just simply a human, vulnerable human, then I believe we can be really kind to each other. And so, yeah, that's what I'm kind of the beginning of the activism that like I'm trying to do, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. One thing I'm also hearing that's a common thread maybe between the work that you're doing is that it seeks to inspire new ways of thinking about space and place. Nancy, you talk about contested sites. Taro, you also mentioned public space. Rodney, your installation work is very much about, who gets to inhabit public space, who gets to define it, who gets to use it, and the stories that we tell about it. How do you see, and this is an invitation to any of you, how do you see your art intervening in these conceptions of space and place? And how does your choice of medium inform the conversations that you're trying to have around them?
Let me start. I don't know if I can really address clearly, but in the case of this project I did with Montalvo, rolling counterpoint, this movable tea house needed to roll into different places, especially public spaces which had specific social dynamics, each of which had really kind of the specific people around, and then rolled into this space and then started having conversation. So I think the point, I'm not sure if it was successful or not, but the point was the conversation, people's interaction is this something that creates the sense of space and also the ownership of the space. So by getting to know others in a specific space, you start claiming your own space there. So somehow the links of the people is the definition of the space. So I think that's what I was trying to do. But it's not a really easy thing to do, and also it's not an easy issue neither. So, but that's what I was thinking, I think, when I was doing the rolling counterpoint.
I can address the sort of space issue as it relates to augmented reality. I mean, one of the things that really drew me to it as a medium is the fact that it's sort of there and not there all at once. And a lot of what I try to do in my drawings on paper is to grapple with that tension in the body. So, that space between binaries that can't be resolved, that's uncontained. And I really love the uncontainedness, particularly of the geolocated work, because it bounces around. It's like glitchy sometimes, but I kind of think that's its subversive potential, and the fact that you really need this prosthetic device to experience it, but it's there. And one thing that happens a lot, we have a piece, we did a whole series, an exhibition here along the river called Defining Line, and there's an artist named Andrea Chung who did a piece about colonization, and she put it over the LA River. And then I always reflect on this, that when I drive over the Hyperion Bridge, when I used to go to my old studio, I knew her piece was there. And so every time, even if I didn't have my phone with me, every time I drove over it, I think, oh, right, that's there in space. She's talking about colonization. She's talking about, all these really intense things that are related. And of course we did it in this very specific way. And that was very, very powerful. And I think that one thing that's also the danger of that, and I've talked to lawyers about this in the Bay Area, I've been warned by a lawyer that, be careful when you talk about site activation, be careful when you talk about site specific, because this space will be policed, it will be monetized. I don't ask permission to do anything, and neither do my collaborators. And so we are trying to reframe it discursively as idea activation, because that's a shared cultural thought space that can't be contained, it can't be located, it can barely be named. And in that sense, then we can have this collective resistance against some of these more, controlling forces. So that's just something that I personally like about this medium. But it's something that I've got a very clear, one eye is open all the time. You know what I mean? Even when I'm asleep. Okay.
Wow. That's incredible, that legal advice that you've gotten. Was that in relation to AR as well, like using that site-specific language to this ephemeral object?
Yes, because a lot of, I mean, I try to do work that's very, that's provocative I try to prompt really thoughtful discourse. I don't, and you know, if people ask me that, can I put like that guy's a douche over his house? The answer is no. Like, I don't want to be sued for libel. Also, I don't really consider that art, but like, you know, so I want to be very mindful, very intentional, very thoughtful. I don't want to put anyone at risk, you know, these things. However, some of the projects, you know, I will only I can take responsibility for my own. You know, if they were to prompt that kind of a reaction, I want to just guard against that. And I want to protect all of my collaborators first and foremost. So, and I think that if your standard is, we're going to be rigorous, we're going to be thoughtful, we're going to put forth the best content we can, you're probably pretty inoculated. But, you know, in this world, I don't put anything past anyone.
That's amazing. Rodney, did you have anything to add to this particular question?
Yeah, I think when I'm like, space has just been a new issue for me. A friend of mine pointed it out, that I've been dealing with a lot of space unconsciously, perhaps because of my my upbringing, moving around a lot as a child. But I think when it comes to like visual space or conceptual space, I've been freeing myself to sort of try to find the best mediums to use for whatever piece. So I'm looking at space in that particular vein. I think with the images for the Sanctuary City, I was looking at space as a layered space where it's you know, it's the color. The colors aren't arbitrary. They represent a space that somebody used to inhabit, where, you know, they represent a flag, and then there's a space for, you know, this sort of institutionalized, this systematic information that, you know, governments and cities require. And then there's a space for their story, which, you know, I intentionally made larger than those forms. And then there's a space for just their image. So yeah, that was very intentional on my part to sort of like demarcate and break down that space, because you know, there's only so much I can do two-dimensionally, but I can activate that idea of layering of information and obstructing information in some cases. When it came for time to the piece of headlands, there was at one point after I built the first block and it was still raw, just wood with nothing on it, I almost took it apart because I thought it was too big for the space. I thought it was too, I thought it was going to be too unwieldy once I built two more that size, that that they would sort of engulf the room, and people wouldn't be able to navigate it, you know, physically or conceptually. And another friend of mine was down a hall. He sort of convinced me, like, no, these pieces, they work perfect for this space. And being able to set those up, and so people can actually walk around them and make relationships with them, you know, was something I didn't quite see up front. I didn't know how big they were going to be, because, you know, I sort of conceived that idea like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and they were, you know, 4 by 4 inch squares. And then, you know, sort of getting the opportunity, like, oh, I can scale this up and make it bigger. And like, then what happens when they are bigger, and how does that impact the audience and when they're seeing these things? And yeah, so for every project I do, you know, I am realizing that, you know, conceptual space or visual space or physical space has really become integral to my practice.
Thank you so much, Rodney. What kind of pivot? Oh, did you want to add something, Nancy?
I just wanted to add one thing to the space conversation. I was really moved by what Rodney just said, and this idea of like taking up space as artists, like and feeling hesitant to take up space. And one thing that and I'm so glad that obviously you did, it's so powerful. One thing that AR also allows us to do is to really take up space. And I remember there was an artist that I collaborated with, and we made her, she has a character called My Golem, and it's an amazing character who's sort of fighting for human rights. and performance character. And we scaled her up and put her, she was so big, she like took up the entire front facade of a building in New York. She's still there. And it just felt so great. You know, it feels like, you know, again, just this idea for all the forces that contain, there's this wonderful way that you can challenge that and be less contained.
I think this is how we started understanding the impact of occupying movement. You know, what occupying means, like what it means to occupy a place, you know. And I think that's, of course, that's the issue of like a sculpture and all that too. But yeah, I think this presence of body and how we place our body in an occupied space and how big we need, you know, I think that's a very interesting question.
Absolutely. All right, we're coming to the end of an hour and I feel like we're just getting started in some ways. Before we pivot to Q&A, I just wanted to kind of close our discussion a little bit with an invitation to think about when art and activism does work and when you think it doesn't work. When does art as activism not do what it, you know, in a really broad sense, what it's trying to do?
I think we've all touched on it when it's not sincere, when, you know, the creator's name is up front and not the cause. When you don't make that thing or that event larger than yourself, and it's not accessible, that's when it doesn't work.
Yeah,
I think working is such a kind of strange term, you know. Whatever we do, we leave a trace of what we do, so that's at least working. Of course, if you're talking about the judgment of any kind of art critics or whoever, that's a totally different story. But the you know, I don't care about that. But especially many of us focuses on like the individuals and kind of like more personal connection we can create with artworks. So I think it always works in a way, but I think the point is how it works rather than if it works or not, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't improve on anything that either Rodney or Taro said. The only thing I would add, which is a very minor point, is that I think sometimes super didactic work can be very alienating. And I think if you're interested in fostering either conversation, empathy, or even just curiosity, it can be a real turnoff to have something super slogany or whatever, because it's just really easy to dismiss. And I don't think that's what anybody really wants. So that's the only thing I have to contribute to that. Otherwise, I 100% agree with both of you.
Yes, absolutely. Authenticity, presence, and it's always working. It's always doing something. Just what is that? All right, we have a few minutes left. So I wanted to open up the floor to the Q&A. We have a question here from Isaac Nkumsa, and he asks, how do you all see your work evolving to include narrative that reflects the influence of the pandemic on societal norms compared to the current direction of your work?
I truly feel I need time to process what we are going through, you know. I can make things reactively, but responsively, I don't think I'm still able to make something about this, or I think it will come out. It will definitely heavily and deeply influence our work, I believe. But for me personally, I haven't been able to come up with anything that's like directly addressing our experience. Of course, whatever I do now has already the impact there. Yeah, but I haven't had enough time to describe it yet.
That makes sense. Yes, Rodney, would you like to?
Yeah, I'm the same. Yeah, it's going to take me a minute to process 2020, especially around the pandemic, and because there's been so many things that, you know, sort of negated the pandemic for me. You know, but also sort of the way I also used the pandemic was like, you know, I'm usually like running between trying to get studio time and being at work and the commute time in between. And I was actually forced to sort of sit still and try to find a way to sort of beat the, you know, all the things that came from the pandemics. Like, you know, I'm not going to the movies. I'm not, you know, I'm not visiting with friends. You know, I'm not outside. I've got this routine of going to the store and coming back and cleaning up. And so what do I do with all that? Like, what do I do with all that time? And how do I sort of break myself out of the cycle of just survival mode and teaching? And for me, it was just like, okay, go do some work. Your studio's 1,000 feet away from where you live. Go do some work. You know, give yourself a goal, give yourself a project, like do a piece every day and a half or something like that. And that's what I came up with. So, so I'm responding to like sort of the malaise that the pandemic could have caused me. And, but as far as like the direct subject of the pandemic, that's yet to be seen for me. Like Taro, it's just going to take me a while to figure all that out and get some distance.
Yeah, I started, we've had this fire hose of news, misinformation, all this stuff all at once. It's been so overwhelming. And for me, I would say also processing, also have thought a lot about all of the inequity this has revealed. And that will continue to fuel a lot of my projects. It's also, I mean, not for nothing, for the first month or so of quarantine, I heard the birds in Los Angeles, okay? Like, that was a revelation. And so really thinking about like, oh, it's both a human problem, it's a global problem, it's a natural problem. We have climate change to face, and pandemics are only going to be more and more common if we don't deal with climate change. And it's just so overwhelming. We've seen the uptick in alcohol consumption. I do not exempt myself from that. And I feel like, you know, we will be processing it for a long time, but just, I think as artists, we always have one ear to the ground. We always have, you know, our eyes wide open. And although it's too much, it's just too much. I think, I think it's going to be real interesting to see what comes out of this. But yeah, it's still all, you know, in that loamy, fertile territory as of now.
Thank you. I think that is a perfect note to close on. Nancy, Taro, Rodney, thank you so much for showing up and really being present in this conversation. I found your work very moving, and I found everything you've shared to be hopeful and generative, even if it's grappling with some really challenging things. Before we close, I'd like to share that this was presented by the Immersive Arts Alliance, whose mission it is to place extraordinary performances and exhibitions throughout the Bay Area accessible to everyone and celebrate our legacy of creativity and innovation. Immersive Arts Alliance needs your support. If you'd like to give, know that your gift will have a real impact, and more than 80% of your gifts will go entirely to artists and arts programming. So please go to immersiveartsalliance.org if you'd like to give. In the meantime, thank you so much, Nancy, Taro, and Rodney. It's been a pleasure to share screen time with you.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.